It's not rocket science. We hear this term thrown around all the time. It's a cliche. But the basic truth under that cliche is that rocket science is really, really hard. When I was 6, I had a book about rockets. It was written for little kids, so it didn't have a lot of technical stuff in it. But I devoured it, memorizing the details that it did give about the rockets that were around back then. I know a lot more about those rockets now, and their abilities, fantastic as they seemed in the 60s, they pale in comparison to what's possible now. I also know a lot more about how rockets are funded, at least here in the US of A, and there are serious problems with funding. And there have been serious problems with funding for a long time. And the thing is, funding for space travel shouldn't be, well, rocket science. The root cause of the problem is that most people don't think we should be funding space exploration. Why should we be sending all our money up there when there are so many problems right down here? It's a constant refrain. We're going to take a look first at why we should fund space travel, and then how we should fund it on this episode of Progressive Solutions. In 1945, science and science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke published an article that explained how a set of 3 satellites orbiting 36,000 kilometers above the equator could provide communications to pretty much everyone on the planet. Today, over 500 satellites are hovering that high above some point on the equator, making a complete rotation once a day. Because their orbit matches Earth's rotation, they stay over the same spot at all times. These are called geostationary orbits. Satellites in geostationary orbits provide satellite TV and radio, weather forecasting, air and sea navigation, military intelligence, and lots more. Millions of Americans use some of these services every day, and that's just at that one height. There are plenty of other heights. Have you ever used your phone to figure out how to get where you're going? Then you used a GPS system powered by satellites that are about 19,000 kilometers up. Satellites are also tracking changes in Earth's gravitational and magnetic fields. This information could one day be used to predict earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Have you ever used a dustbuster? The battery and engine that powers this and just about every other cordless tool in your house was developed by Black & Decker to dig for and collect rock samples on the moon. Invisible braces, cell phone cameras, LASIK surgery, insulin pumps, long-lasting tires, CAT scans, your computer mouse, artificial limbs. All of these inventions and lots more started as technology for the space program. What's next? Who knows? But we'll never find out and we'll never benefit from the new technologies unless we continue to fund space exploration. You think that sending money up there doesn't help you down here? It helps you in more ways than you could ever know. And unlike the previous age of exploration, which was all about conquering and exploiting other people for profit, this exploration is about exploration, expanding our horizons. Yeah, there are profits to be gained, but without killing millions of people. In fact, the technologies that we're developing for the space exploration are saving and could continue to save millions of lives. And it's not just technology. Exploration challenges the human mind. It promotes hope and optimism. And we could certainly use a lot more of that. Exploration is what we do ever since we came down out of the trees. It's what makes us human. In short, sending money up there is an investment in a better future and in our human condition, right here. Okay, that's the why. Before we get to the how, I'd like to take a moment to talk about something that isn't rocket science. In fact, it's very easy. If you like these videos, please hit that subscribe button below and feel free to leave comments down there. Also, spread the word. There are a lot of progressive solutions. So, what's wrong with how we're funding space exploration? Politics. But first, we need to go into a little history. Back in the 1960s, space exploration was mostly a proxy for the Cold War. We were trying to beat the Russians to the moon. For pretty much everyone except a few scientists, there was no other reason for NASA to exist. And once we did get to the moon, most everybody stopped caring. Fortunately for space exploration, during that time there were so many contractors and subcontractors that the work was spread all over the country. This meant a lot of jobs in a lot of congressional districts. And that's a large part of how NASA survived after the Apollo program was closed down early. Cutting NASA was like closing domestic military bases. No member of Congress wanted the cuts to come from their district. Even so, the next big thing, the space shuttle, was seriously underfunded. Enter the Department of Defense. They came through with a lot of money. Of course, that money had strings attached. One string was that the space shuttle's cargo bay had to be gargantuan, over 300 cubic meters, more than twice the size of SpaceX's Falcon 9 payload bay. This was mostly because the National Reconnaissance Office wanted to send up really, really big spy satellites. So, naturally, the largest spy satellite we've ever sent up was during the Space Shuttle era. But it was sent up on a Delta IV Heavy booster, not the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle wasn't just very big, it was also very heavy, so it needed an external fuel tank that was bigger than the shuttle itself, and a couple of solid rocket boosters, and suddenly what was supposed to be an inexpensive, reusable rocket was mostly expensive throwaway parts. Meanwhile, we had plenty of rockets for cargo only. Atlas and Delta boosters have been around for 60 years in various configurations, some of them being used to this very day. Although, as I make this video, both of them are being phased out. They, along with other rockets, have been the workhorses, getting almost no press but doing almost all of the work. In 2005, as the Space Shuttle program was being wound down, a new program called Constellation was created to take its place. The idea was to reshape so-called heritage or legacy technologies to build a new rocket that could take people beyond Earth orbit and out into the solar system without spending a fortune. The Constellation program cost tens of billions of dollars and failed to produce even one usable rocket. Meanwhile, all the money paid for over 1,500 contractors, their facilities, suppliers, employees in hundreds of congressional districts until it was canceled in 2010. Meanwhile, a very few very wealthy people decided to strike out on their own and produce rockets privately. In 2000, Jeff Bezos started Blue Origin. 2 years later, Elon Musk created SpaceX, and just 2 years after that, Richard Branson founded Virgin Galactic. A couple of years later, New Zealander Peter Beck got Rocket Lab off the ground. Rocket Lab is officially a US company for tax purposes, but they operate almost exclusively out of New Zealand. It didn't take long for NASA to realize that these private companies could be accomplishing things that NASA and its contractors were unable to match. This realization, in a rather messy way, birthed the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, or COTS, program. NASA would contract with private companies to, among other things, supply the International Space Station. Fun note, the office that manages the COTS program is called the Commercial Crew and Cargo Program Office, or C3PO. So, what has COTS produced? Well, so far, SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and Virgin Orbit, a spin-off of Virgin Galactic, have managed to put stuff in orbit. Blue Origin seems a long way from managing that, but at least two other companies, Astra and Firefly, appear very close. SpaceX has also put people in orbit. And all this is great, except for Blue Origin's molasses-like progress. But all of these companies have contracts with NASA to continue developing various rockets and satellite and human launch capabilities. We're just beginning to see how multiple private-public partnerships can yield amazing results. Meanwhile, the legacy companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, well, they're working on stuff. Really, they are. Really. Thanks to these new companies, the cost of sending stuff and people into orbit has plummeted. As a result, lots of private companies are now paying to send satellites into a variety of orbits for a whole new sheaf of purposes. The benefits of this boom are already amazing. And then there's the Space Launch System, or SLS. As I mentioned, NASA has awarded contracts to a whole lot of private companies. Well, the total of all these contracts may be less than what NASA has spent on SLS alone. So what is SLS? Basically, it's the successor to the ill-fated Constellation program. It's NASA's attempt to get to the moon the old-fashioned way by building a really big rocket out of legacy parts that the Constellation was going to use. And there are some problems. Problem number one is the old parts aren't all that good. Newer parts work better. Problem number two is that the old parts were hideously expensive and still are. Problem number three is that rocket technology has progressed far beyond what the SLS is doing. But the largest problem is that they're not really reusing old parts. They're modifying and upgrading them, and they're even making enormous changes to size and weight, and in some cases even function. Trying to reshape an old part to fit a new model can be harder than just creating a new rocket. The result is that after spending $20 billion, there are no usable SLS rockets, although, as I record this video, they have assembled the first one at the Kennedy Space Center, and they hope to roll it out for initial testing in a few months. But even if it does work, it could cost, hang on to your hat, $2 billion per launch. For that money, we can launch 30 of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rockets. And because SpaceX's Super Heavy rocket in development, Starship, has completely reusable hardware, it may be able to boost as much as the SLS for less than the cost of even one Falcon 9. In short, the best case scenario for SLS means nobody will want to use it because it's too blinkin' expensive. So why hasn't it been canceled? Politics. Just like the old days, NASA contractors have facilities all over the country, and nobody in Congress wants the facility in their district to close. And NASA can't afford not to waste this money because it could cost them the funding they need for the stuff that's actually working. And we're back to the problem that most Americans don't want our tax dollars funding a space program. 1/3 of Americans think that NASA should be eliminated. When Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos recently went into space, or not, depending on where your definition of space is, many people and media outlets chided the billionaires for wasting their money on a vanity project. That's how little people care about space exploration. We need to change people's perception of space exploration. Step one is for NASA and its private partners to spread the word about all the things we have thanks to our space program. Show people how sending money and people up there helps us all down here. Build excitement for not just continuing, but expanding space exploration. Step two is showing people not just how hard rocket science is, but why the mistakes and the failures that happen all the time are needed in order to get the big accomplishments. This way, when a rocket fails, at least if nobody's on board, people will accept it as part of the learning process. It should be easy to convince anyone who plays computer games that failure happens. Your character in many of these games will fail a lot before you can get to the higher levels, but it's worth it. Once we build understanding and support, step three should be an end to politicized spending on wasteful projects. We have to cancel spending on things like the SLS and stick with projects that could actually succeed, keeping in mind that not all of those projects actually will. This will build more support as people see that NASA is actually being more careful about how they spend tax money. So many people are accomplishing so much with space travel. If NASA and its partners can raise awareness of and excitement for space exploration, we can get rid of the waste while assuring better funding and accomplish even more. Thanks for watching. Stay progressive.